Okay, thanks. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Phil Copestake. I work at a research and development company called OPM. I'm here today to speak about the key findings from this piece of research, unlocking local capacity. I'm not the author of this report, but I work very closely with Rob, who's the author, and have been kind of working with him in follow-up work we've been doing too. And I think this piece of work speaks very much to OPM's general ethos, which is both to do good quality research and indeed work with Robert and colleagues at DCLG on several large research and evaluation projects over the years, but also actually then taking insights from research and evaluation and translating them into real change, and particularly, passion of mine, real change in real mainstream local authorities around the country. Because as those of you who work with local authorities will know, there can be sometimes a bit of a disconnect between what we might call the kind of the exemplars, the authorities doing the kind of the bright and whizzy stuff, and the more mainstream, dare I say, slightly more humdrum kind of local authorities who can do some really good work and do some really interesting things, but perhaps that kind of work isn't going to come to the fore so much. So that really was quite an important driving motivation for unlocking local capacity, which was to take some of those innovative ideas about empowerment, about engagement, about using assets and resources differently from the rather rarefied air of the exemplars and the think tanks out into the mainstream, out into the council chambers and the committee rooms and so on. So what we did was we spoke to senior officers and members in 30 top-tier local authorities across England, and we looked to find out about how they were unlocking the capacity of individual residents in their local areas, local communities, and also their own council. So that was really the kind of three levels that we looked at as part of our research. And then the purpose of the report was partly to showcase what these local authorities were doing to unlock their local capacity, but also to try to understand some of the things that made that happen more easily and some of the things that could get in the way. And as I said just now, we are continuing to work with several local authorities across the country on a diagnostic and capacity building process, building on the findings from the national research, but to really, I've got a few copies of the kind of diagnostic kind of toolkit that we use to pinpoint where local authorities are in terms of unlocking local capacity, and we're working with several to try to fill some of the gaps. I'm just going to talk very kind of briefly about the three kind of main areas of unlocking local capacity, but I'm really interested to kind of leave plenty of time for discussion, particularly in the kind of context of, okay, so if we maybe understand now a bit more about local authorities' role, what's DCLG's role in terms of supporting the kind of mobilisation, supporting the unlocking local capacity, and I think there certainly is one. In my humble opinion, I think certainly one of the, well, perhaps the overarching conclusion of unlocking local capacity is that councils do have an active role. The subtitle of the report is Why Active Citizens Need Active Councils. We don't feel it is just about unleashing local capacity. We do feel there is a process of unlocking, a process of actually kind of getting at the ideas, the innovation, the resources, the energy, and the assets of local people and places, and really kind of making it work better. And councils have a vital role to play in that, and I'm sure DCLG does too. So, three main areas. First of all, how can councils unlock the capacity of individual residents, individual people? I'm going to do a real whistle-stop tour through this. I haven't got kind of handouts, but the report itself is available on the OPM website, www.opm.co.uk for free download, so it's pretty short, so please have a look. So, first area, how do councils unlock individual capacity? Now, as you'll know, unlocking individual capacity can mean many things. We saw examples of councils supporting local people to take control of their own lives, and rather than kind of getting tied up in lots of competing and overlapping service interventions, actually do more for themselves. Realising their own potential as local leaders, local champions, actually influencing their neighbours and other residents and kind of getting things going, and also changing behaviours. Bless you, adopting more healthier or more positive behaviours. And we saw that, first and foremost, this usually means, in the best cases, councils getting down and dirty with local residents, actually really in many cases embedding staff in local communities to really understand what's going on, to kind of do away with preconceptions about challenges, issues, service usage patterns, but through research, ethnography, or simply just being there and talking to people, really getting a first-hand understanding of what goes on and what people think. And that can, as much as it will surprise you to hear, that can be quite a challenge, quite a culture shock, even for some of the most forward-thinking kind of council staff. Actually, kind of getting out of the city hall or county hall and kind of going in and kind of being with, speaking to, engaging with local residents can be something of a culture shift, something of a culture shock indeed. We've heard already from the previous presentation about taking an asset-based approach, and certainly we heard from the people we spoke to in councils across the country that taking an asset-based approach is fundamentally important and a real helpful way of shifting the dialogue from need and to actually what people already have. Assets can be physical assets, actually what people own, people have at their disposal, also can be skills or talents. Through a separate kind of piece of work, Ageing Well, which many of you will be familiar with, I'm sure, with the LGA, with DWP. We are running asset mapping workshops with older people. And again, I think that in common with the examples spoken about earlier on, it can be quite a transformative process to get people in a workshop or other setting to talk about what they already have. Because there can be that default setting on behalf of councils, but also on behalf of local people. There's much less than there actually is. So we saw time and time again the successful use of that asset-focused approach really working well. It also means, unlocking individual capacity also means understanding the social and other networks of influence that are really important at the local level. So who are the individuals, who are the groups that people really listen to and take note of when thinking about whether to do something or whether to get involved in something. We saw that councils said that when they tried blanket appeals, please come and help with this, please come and talk to us about this, blanket appeals often fall flat, whereas if a person is being asked by their neighbour, by someone they know, someone they trust, then they're much more likely to kind of come and contribute to a kind of a council process, a kind of consultation process, or actually kind of get involved, start volunteering. And the last area where we saw councils really helping to unlock individual capacity was where they were looking at involving something around reciprocation. And you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with the kind of good examples of things like time banking, but actually also you may be familiar with the work of people like Tessie Britton around things like focusing on actually people having fun at their pastimes, enjoyments, hobbies and pursuits, and actually starting there and then building from that rather than starting with the need to do something and then trying to incorporate other things in. So those are just kind of some of the examples of this kind of first level, in many ways the most important level, the unlocking individual capacity, some of the kind of key ingredients that local authorities were mixing in to unlock individual capacity. Then moving up a level to the second, this is around unlocking community capacity. We found that many of the councils we spoke to had a kind of long and in some cases successful tradition of working closely with voluntary sector groups, community groups and co-terminus infrastructure bodies and associations, which many councils, I suppose, which we're actually kind of stereotype, particularly kind of northern authorities were continuing and really dedicated to continuing. And yet all councils we spoke to reported that tightening purse strings and financial pressures were meaning they were having to kind of rein back on some of their support to organised community voluntary sector organisations. But in the best cases, councils were thinking about how they could act as more of a convener or a broker of voluntary and community sector groups, and that could be through things like helping local voluntary organisations to pool their resources, to pool their expertise, and to kind of work together in ways that meant they could serve more people or a greater number of areas than they might do if they were working alone. So councils helping local voluntary organisations to link up and to essentially be more than the sum of their parts. But in terms of councils working with communities directly themselves, we found that councils were obviously kind of facing in many cases lots of anger and upset about things like services closing or services being under threat. In the really best cases, councils could turn that anger, which was in a way energy and passion, to kind of more mutually kind of constructive ends, where they were really upfront and honest. And it sounds like a really kind of a glib thing to say, but it really came through very, very strongly as common feedback, that where councils were honest about the difficult financial pressures they were facing well in advance of the spending decisions being made, they can actually engage in a much more constructive dialogue with local communities. That led to community groups being formed to take on ownership and running of local resources or services, or actually can come to decisions together that then the local communities were much happier with, even though they still kind of led to particular services being kind of closed or changed or reconfigured or whatever. But actually that early and upfront and honest engagement was really important. One of the noticeable trends, and I'm quite attracted to the idea of the kind of fractal kind of innovation or fractal change, I think one of the things we saw too was that councils, where they may have before insisted on every ward or every service going at the same pace, we saw much more willingness to accept variation and things going at different pace. So if there was a particular service that had some really great ideas about unlocking local capacity, councils corporately would be more willing just to let it get on with it. If there was a ward that had a particularly good idea around involving local people, then councils corporately would just be much more willing to let that kind of go full steam ahead and worry less about kind of other areas perhaps falling behind a bit. And you know, I know there are some downsides to that too, but it's certainly a strong trend we saw. Okay, I'm not going to speak for much longer, just another 2 or 3 minutes. Just to talk about the third area of unlocking local capacity, which was actually councils unlocking their own capacity, councils unlocking councils themselves. And obviously one of the biggest assets that councils have are their own organisations, their own staff, their own members. They're still big spenders, big employers, and have very kind of strong powers through regulation and other kind of play-shaping powers, as you'll know very well. And one of the big trends we saw was, you'll be very familiar through your work on whole place, community budgeting and so on, we certainly saw councils being very keen to devolve money and other resources, and crucially decisions about how that money and resources were used to ward level, to local community level, and in the best cases actually to think about commissioning decisions at that local level too. So not just giving a discrete pot of cash, almost discretionary spend to a local ward, councillor or committee or group, actually looking at how commissioning of mainstream services, whether they be youth services or leisure services or other things, actually devolving that power over that commissioning process to local level too. We saw councils looking to devolve, or rather to unlock the capacity of their buildings and physical assets. We often, I think, generally speaking, certainly within the 30 local authorities we spoke to, we saw councils shying away from the full asset kind of passing over transfer because of concern about kind of burdens and legal and other processes. We often saw kind of workarounds or halfway house options, so councils would retain legal ownership and responsibility for the assets they held, but actually pass over day-to-day running and management and responsibility to local groups, and that was found to work quite well. Last point I'll kind of make about councils unlocking their own capacity was council staff. As I say, obviously councils are still, even in the kind of context of sharp reductions in staff numbers, big employers, and we saw many examples of councils looking to unlock the capacity of their own staff through different approaches to staff volunteering in the community, using their expertise and so on in the community. There's certainly an organisational culture issue here, which we don't have time to go into in depth, but there's something about councils helping, council managers and leaders helping their staff to be a bit more innovative and more risk-taking. That does involve a bit of a quid pro quo in terms of allowing things to go wrong sometimes, which can be quite a difficult kind of step for councils to take. There's also, I think, a really important thing, which is we saw many examples of councils being willing to do the boring stuff to help the communities get ahead, whether that's making tools and materials and other resources available to local community groups without any of the kind of red tape or the kind of bidding processes that might normally be associated with those kind of processes, or in fact just being willing to take on the boring processes like looking at issues of kind of governance of local kind of groups or CRB checks or whatever, actually holding on to those things so that local people can do the more interesting stuff was quite a noticeable trend. So that's a real whistle-stop tour around unlocking our capacity. As I say, it's on the website. We've got the copies of the diagnostic process that we're kind of going through with local councils at the moment to try to pinpoint where they're doing well and where they've got more to do. One thing I've not talked much about, because I'd love to open up the discussion when that kind of point comes, but I think in terms of where, again, in my humble opinion, where DCLG could really make a difference, if there's one thing, it's actually around working with elected members. I think it's a golden thread, or maybe it's a silver thread, I don't know, through all of this was how vital elected members are. In an era of kind of shrinking core council size and scale, actually elected members and the democratic processes centering on them become even more crucial. Elected members can be real agents of change, real community leaders in the best cases, but they're not used to it. In the vast majority of cases, there's a lot of work to be done around increasing, building their capacity, awareness, skills, and so on and so forth. But I think there's absolutely vital and a real potential to support them to make things happen. So, there you go. Thanks very much.
We're running quite short on time, but I think that we should go ahead, as